Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the PrepFactory.com SAT preparation video series. Now, there's going to be videos, of course, that are going to cover all the topics you need to know, all the individual bits of information you're going to need for success on the SAT. But before we get started, it's probably useful to go over what we know about the SAT, the basics of the SAT, how it's structured, and whatnot. Now, of course, let's start with, the most basic things. And there's going to be three general topics covered on the SAT. And those are, of course, reading, writing, and mathematics. Now, we know a little bit about each of these sections. On the reading section, for instance, we know that we're going to have 67 total questions. And of those 67 questions, 48 of them are going to be passage-based reading comprehension, right? We're going to basically be given a passage and asked to answer questions about it, which we will, of course, cover in much more depth in the reading video series, as well as 19 sentence completion questions, where you'll basically be given a sentence that will have either one or two blanks, and you'll be asked to fill in the appropriate words to finish the sentence. Now, the writing section is going to have 54 total multiple choice questions, right? And of those 54 questions, there's going to be 25 improving sentences questions, right? Questions where you'll basically be given a sentence that will be partially underlined, and you'll be asked to, rewrite effectively that part of the sentence in the most effective way. There will be 18, I wrote improving sentence errors. Let me fix that. Of course, not improving sentence errors, but identifying sentence errors, right? You'll be given a sentence with 5 options for an error in the sentence, and you'll be asked to identify which one is indeed incorrect, as well as 6 improving paragraphs questions, in which case you'll be given, a whole paragraph or even 2 paragraphs, and you'll be asked to, figure out ways to, change that paragraph to make it better. And finally, the math section. There's, of course, one more question on the writing section, right? There'll be 54 multiple choice questions plus an essay, right, which will last for 25 minutes and will always be the first section of the test. We're moving on to the math section. We are always going to have 49 total questions. And of those 49 questions, pardon me, I've made another error. Let me correct something real quick. Sorry about that, but there will be 49 total questions plus the essay on the writing section, right? So if we include the essay, I suppose 50 questions, right? And then 54 total questions on the math section. Now, of those 54 questions, 44 of them will be, your standard multiple choice. You'll have a question with 5 possible answers, and you'll be asked to, select the right answer, as well as 10 grid-in questions, right, which will all appear on one section, and will, you'll have a question in the same way you would on any given math, multiple choice question, right? But you will be, instead of being given options to choose, you will have to grid in, literally, fill in the correct answer that you've discovered. Okay, so now that we've covered the types of questions on each section, or the number of questions, right? Let's move on and talk about sort of the way it's formatted, right? Okay, so there's definitely a few things where we're always going to know about the format, things that will not change, or will only change within certain parameters, right? Okay, so there's always going to be 10 total sections. You'll always be, seated in the chair taking the test for the length of 10 sections. Now, of those 10 sections, there are always going to be 7 25-minute sections. Now, these will always be your first 7 sections. So sections 1 through 7 on the test will last for 25 minutes. Your 8th and 9th sections, the next 2 sections, will always be 20 minutes long, and your final section will always be 10 minutes long. Now, the way these are put together, those 7 25-minute sections will always contain 2 reading sections, 2 writing sections, of course, the first of which will be the essay, and 2 math sections. Now, the 7th section, the final section there, will either be reading or math, right? Now, that 7th section is going to be unscored. It's what we call an experimental section, right? So one would think that this would help you out, right? Because there'd be one section you don't really have to work on because it doesn't count towards your score. But actually, you're not going to know which of these sections is the experimental section. So you won't be able to, not work on any section. So even though one of your sections won't be scored, it is obviously integral that you, do your very best on all 10 sections, as you don't know which one will be experimental section. Now, of these 2 20-minute sections, there are always going to be 1 reading and 1 math, right? The order of them will vary, right? So section 8 might be reading on one test and it might be math on the next. That's going to vary, but it's always going to be reading and math in sections 8 and 9. And your final 10-minute section will always be writing, right? So the test is going to be bookended by the essay at the beginning, right? And a 10-minute writing section at the end. So you know that no matter what, you're always going to begin and end with writing, right? And this, of course, adds up altogether with, your breaks and whatnot, of which there will be 3. There will be 3 5-minute breaks. They will follow sections 2, 4, and 6, right? So, budget your time for that, or budget your energy, I suppose, for that, or you know that you will have those breaks built in. So now that we've covered the format of the test, let's talk about scoring. Now, as you can see, I've written up at the top of our page here, raw score versus scaled score. Now, these are the 2 types of scores that you will receive, but of course you will only actually, I suppose the only one you'll actually receive is the scaled score, right? That's the score that you're used to seeing, like, any given section being out of 800 points, right? But your raw score is what your scaled score is computed from. Now let's talk real quick about how your raw score is computed and what that means. Okay, so as you can see, I've got written there the way in which your raw score is computed. Now, it's always going to be, always, the number of correct answers you have on a section minus the number of incorrect answers you have on a section times 1/4, right? So you're not going to lose a whole point, obviously, for any question you get wrong, but you will lose a 1/4 of a point. So let's take a look at a hypothetical situation. Let's say on the reading section, right, which we know to have 67 questions, let's say you got, 59 of them right, okay? So say you got 59 correct answers, right? Which then, of course, leaves 8 total incorrect answers, right? Now, this would, of course, lead to a pretty good score, but let's go ahead and take a look at what that would be, right? So in that case, we're going to have your raw score is then going to be 59, right, minus 8 times 1/4, right? So it's going to then be 59, right, minus 2. So your raw score then would be 52. Now, this is actually, that's not what it is at all, right? It's 57, rather, right? So your maximum, raw score there would, of course, been 67. And in this case, it becomes 57. So that's your raw score. That is what your scaled score is computed from. Now, your scaled score is what you're going to see appear in the range from 200 to 800, right? You're used to seeing these kinds of scores, right? So 200 would be the absolute minimum score, 800 being the absolute maximum score, of course, on any given section, adding up to a total of, of course, a maximum of 2,400 for the entire test, or by that logic, also a minimum of 600, right? Now, the scaled score, what your score is actually going to be, is actually not entirely dependent upon your raw score. Obviously, that's how it's computed, but it's dependent upon how you do relative to everyone else taking the test. Now, I'm going to go ahead and draw something to help us conceive of what that means. Okay, so this is going to be the first instance of what will be many instances of my poor artistry in these lessons. But this is what some of you might recognize, especially if you're taking statistics, as a normal distribution, right? So the average score on any given section, well, it's going to fluctuate ever so slightly. It tends to be, a tiny bit higher than 500. But the average score, in theory at least, should be a 500, right? So then your maximum score, the top percentile there, right, is an 800, and the bottom score then is, of course, a 200, right? So again, pretty much exactly 50% of people should be on either side of that 500, and the vast, vast majority of people are going to be somewhere between, 400 and 600 or something like that, right? So let's say this 57 here, I'm just guesstimating here, but that'd probably put you somewhere around here, right? Something like a 730 maybe, or 710, or I'm not sure exactly, right? We would have to, it would depend on the test, obviously, about how everyone else did on that test. But what you're being scored on is not necessarily how many questions you get right, but how many questions you get right relative to others, right? So then your raw score is taken and computed into this scaled score. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about before we move into our proper lessons is omitting questions. And many of you have probably heard that you should be omitting questions on the SAT, which is actually kind of a myth, right? You see here that, you lose a 1/4 of a point for every question you get wrong, so therefore it would be logical if you, left blank the questions you got wrong, yes, your score would be higher. But the problem is you don't know necessarily ahead of time, whether your answer is going to be wrong, right? So let's do a little quick math to demonstrate why omitting answers is actually not necessarily a good idea. Okay, so as you can see on the left side of our screen, I've drawn the, little simulated, answer choices there, right? Like A, B, C, D, E, which is how exactly, all SAT questions will appear. And so let's just say this is a question that you have absolutely no idea. You're completely flabbergasted by this question, right? What would our expected gain from this question be? Well, if even we're just straight out guessing, even if we don't read the question and just mark an answer, right? There's still a 1 in 5 chance that we're going to get the question right? In which case we would gain 1 whole point towards our raw score, right? Now, let's say, okay, so if there's a 1 in 5 chance we're going to get it right, that of course leaves a 4 in 5 chance that we're going to get it wrong, right? In which case you would lose a quarter of a point, right? So then our expected gain is going to be 1/5 times 1, which is 1/5, plus 4/5 times negative 1/4, which is going to be negative 4/20, or if we reduce it, right, is going to be negative 1/5, right? So 1/5 plus negative 1/5 is, of course, going to equal 0, right? So even if we're just flat out guessing, there's actually no difference, really, between leaving the question blank or answering it, right? Our expected gain is going to be exactly the same. Now, yes, it is more likely that you're going to lose that quarter of a point, but that small chance that you get that whole point completely outweighs that risk, right? So if you have literally absolutely no idea on a question, it does, I suppose, you could make the argument that it makes more sense to leave it blank or that it makes more sense to guess. There's really no better choice there, right? But if you can eliminate even one answer or you have any inkling whatsoever, your expected gain is going to become positive. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so let's say you're given a question and you're not really sure what the answer is, but you know for sure that, let's say, D is wrong. You can eliminate D, right? You're 100% sure that D isn't the right answer. So now we're down to A, B, C, and E. So there are 4 choices, right? So our guessing becomes more likely, right? So even if we're just straight up guessing from the 4 remaining choices, so even if you don't have, any inkling of what might follow, right, or what out of those the answer might be, there's now a 1 in 4 chance that we gain that whole point, right, that we get the answer correct. And then now only a 3 out of 4 chance, rather than a 4 out of 5 chance, that we lose that quarter of a point. Okay, so if we do some math, right, it's going to be then 1/4 plus, well, then that's going to be negative 3/16, right? So if we find common denominators, then it's going to be 4/16 plus negative 3/16, right? So our expected gain in this case is going to be a positive 1/16 of a point. So as you can see, it makes sense to mark an answer so long as you can eliminate even one answer. Your expected gain has become positive, right? So long as you have any inkling whatsoever about what the answer to the question might be. And this is not the last time you'll hear me say this. I'm sure I'll reiterate this at various points because it is an important part of maximizing your total score, right? But as long as you have any inkling, you really shouldn't be omitting questions. Now, what this doesn't mean is that you should be rushing through sections to make sure you get to everything, right? Because if you know that you're much more likely to get the questions at the beginning of a section right, and that you may not have time to get to the ones at the end, that doesn't mean you should rush through. You should take whatever time it takes to get all the questions right that you can. But assuming that you're getting to every question, you should be marking an answer unless you are absolutely flabbergasted, have no idea on that question. And in that case, you have exactly even odds for guessing or for not guessing. Your expected gain is exactly the same, right? Okay, so this concludes the basic overview of the SAT. I do wish you luck. I hope you enjoy our videos that follow, which will cover everything you need to know for success on the SAT. And I hope you enjoy them, and thank you for watching.